I've never really done kung fu or martial arts. You know, physical. I'm a relatively flexible person, relatively fit person, but I'm completely unathletic and unsporty. Always have been and always will be. I was always terrible at games and all that sort of stuff at school. I hated them. I think I hated the organised and team nature of the events more. I think I had a sort of psychological problem with sort of sharing a goal with others, which may be more my problem than theirs. But generally speaking, physically, I'm not particularly fit. But I'm okay, and I did a little bit. I did a little bit of for the last Johnny English movie, Johnny English Reborn, that we did in 2011, and I had to do a bit of fighting. High kicks, I'm quite good at. I can kick quite high. That's about the extent of my athletic capability. My main problem with the Kung Fu Snickers ad was the heights, was shooting up high on rigs and things and running across the roofs of buildings. I'm not good at heights. I don't enjoy that at all. I've done a few movies. Actually, the first Johnny English movie, again, when I know I had to fly down on a rope and grab a crown off John Malkovich, and it meant starting at a height of 60 or 70 feet and coming down, and every time, I must have done it 20 times. I mean, in full harness. I wasn't actually hanging onto a rope, and that was my only source of saviour. But even so, every time I did it, my heart was in my mouth, and I absolutely hated it. I thought, why am I doing this? You know, this is not a good way to earn a living. It doesn't feel right at all. So I'm not really good at heights, and that was a challenge. As soon as I come off the ground, I'm not happy. As soon as I come off the ground more than 6 or 7 feet, I think I'm getting nervous. So, but somehow you tell yourself, and everyone's very reassuring, and everyone's very professional, and those people who strap you up and connect the lines, and you think, well, they've done it a lot, and they're bragging about their work on the last James Bond movie, and you think, well, they must know what they're doing. So far, they have done, and so far, I've survived. I've survived. I certainly wouldn't have wanted to be a politician, but the engineering side, yeah, it's odd because a lot of people think that I should have done something more artistic, something more obviously creative or linguistic at universities. That I should have been studying French literature or Russian or English even at university, like most of my peers were. But I really wanted to do engineering. I've got 2 degrees. I've got one in electrical and electronic engineering, and then a master's research degree in engineering science, in control systems, in self-tuning control systems, just in case you want to know. And I really enjoyed it. I think what I thought I may have done was to end up on the technical side of show business. I think I may have been a cameraman or a sound engineer or something along those lines. I think I was drawn to the industry, to the business we call show. But I actually remember I applied for a job, a vacation job with the BBC when I was 18. When I was at university, in a summer vacation job, and I failed. I failed the interview. I remember I passed the colour blindness test. I remember that, but I remember I was asked the question: do you think a television studio should be an acoustically live or acoustically dead place? And I said, oh, acoustically live sounds much more interesting, which of course was exactly the wrong answer. So I think that was the cause of my failure. So I think I might have ended up on the technical side of the entertainment industry, but I didn't. I ended up on the other side of the entertainment industry. I'm very pleased, obviously, that Mr. Bean has this weird global outreach. It's rather odd to think about it sometimes, which is why I don't think about it too much. Actually, the idea that you are known by millions or potentially billions of people whom you will never met, and often whose cultures you do not understand and have never witnessed or experienced yourself, and that is a slightly odd thing. But it's something of which I suppose one could or should be proud. The character of Mr. Bean is interesting in that he evolves. So we've just done some new cartoon Mr. Beans that we're making at the moment. We'll be finished them at the end of this year. And it's interesting because he's talking a lot more than he has done, and I'm really enjoying it. It feels like it's not quite a new Mr. Bean, but it's a development, it's an evolution. And I think Mr. Bean has been like that from the very beginning. He started off with a very simple idea that my friend Richard Curtis and I, the screenwriter, created of just a man who can't stay awake. That was our first Mr. Bean idea, and I just sat in a chair in a rehearsal room and we rehearsed a silly idea of how does a man behave if he's trying to stay awake but he can't stay awake. And out of that simple idea we developed a visual sketch which turned into the church sketch, actually, a Mr. Bean church sketch about him falling asleep in the lap of the man next to him. And so from that simple idea, Mr. Bean was just the person I naturally became when I wasn't allowed to talk. That was kind of how the character developed and how he has continued to develop. And then sometimes he's talked a lot. In the first Mr. Bean movie, he had a great long speech at the end, which was quite controversial with us in the Bean fraternity, because we weren't quite sure if we should have allowed him to talk that much. But it seemed to work okay. And then the second Mr. Bean movie, Mr. Bean's Holiday, was, I think, far more pure. He spoke far less, and I enjoyed that. With the cartoons, he's talking a little bit more, but I think talking in a way that's consistent with the visually expressing character that we've developed. My relation to him, I don't know. I don't regard him as part of me. I think he reflects a little bit how I probably was when I was 9 or 10 years old, because Mr. Bean is essentially a child. He's a child trapped in a man's body, and that's fun to watch. It's fun to watch an adult, behaving like a child, an adult behaving how an adult is not supposed to behave. And that, I suppose, is the key to the character and to the comedy. But apart from that, I easily leave him behind. I don't find that he haunts me, not at all. I'm not sure of what I'm most proud. They always say that pride is a sin, so I'm always kind of nervous about claiming pride in anything. I mean, what I get satisfaction from is what the audience think, because I'm a great believer. Some people create comedy or create art in order to please themselves or to please their friends and their professional peers. They're the people that they're aiming to please, and I've never felt that. I'm very keen to please myself. I need to believe that it's funny, and I need to empathize with it completely. But my greatest interest is in the wider audience, is in people who hopefully are going to pay to see what you've done. And that's not just because I want to make a lot of money out of it. It's because that's the audience is the point, is the reason. If there isn't an audience, to me, there's no point doing what I do and what we do. So when I look around, I don't know really. There are films that I've enjoyed making that haven't done so well, and there are films that were a bit of a nightmare which have turned out to be usually the most admired. The film, I think, Mr. Bean's Holiday, which we made in 2007, that's a film I'm aware, I like what I hear people's reactions to it being, if that's not too complicated a way of putting it, that because I say I like to hear what other people are thinking, not what I think. And if other people like it, then as far as I'm concerned, it's worked. And I could, if it wasn't a sin, I could be proud of it. So Mr. Bean's Holiday, I think is a very interesting movie. Actually, I think it's rather fun. I mean, the other movies have qualities, and The Blackadder is something I like, if only because I know I can't take anywhere near sole responsibility for that. It was a very nice sort of repertory company of very, very fine comic actors who got together and made something, along with the writers and a very good producer. And it was just this wonderful feeling of a comedy consensus being created, a real sort of empathy between a group of people saying, this is what we're going to do and this is how we're going to do it. It was quite stressful at times, it was a very difficult thing to do. Interpersonal relationships occasionally were strained, but we all ended up as friends, I think, and I think the work speaks for itself. I never really wanted him to get too old. I've always regarded him as a sort of timeless, ageless, almost cartoon-like figure who always looked the same. So certainly I have to dye my hair when I play him now, which is fine. Although I was doing him for a sketch for a Comic Relief, a charity thing this year, and I was doing this only a few weeks ago. Mr. Bean at a funeral, we'd never had him at a funeral, so we thought we'd stick him in a funeral and see what happens. And I think the result is good. And a lot of people said, there's something actually rather interesting about Mr. Bean. He's almost more convincing as a middle-aged character than as a younger character. And I thought that was interesting, whether it's just that I know even better now how to play him than I did when we started out with him 35 years ago, 35 years ago, really, on stage. So I think he does suit actually middle age, or could do, or can do. I think he looks all right. I think that he looks all right on screen still. And as long as physically, because he's a very physical character, as long as physically I can play the part, then maybe I should carry on playing it. So I'm less scared of doing him now than I was a few years ago when I thought that, frankly, he should be retired. But I don't think he'll be out of retirement for long. That's my feeling. Well, the next major TV thing is to play a French detective called Maigret, which were a whole string of novels written by Georges Simenon between 1930 and 1967, over a vast span of time. And we're setting our films in 1955. So this is for ITV, the big commercial broadcaster here, which we're going to make in the autumn. Just 2 films, which will be two-hour slots on commercial television. And it's a straight role. It's definitely a very serious role. But I'm looking forward to it, actually, because it's a fascinating world. And although it feels like a bit of a well-worn path to be playing a TV detective, which is, most characters on TV seem to be detectives. But I think Maigret is a particularly interesting one, operating in Paris, in France, in the 1930s to the 1950s. And as I say, we've set ours in 1955. Just very interesting. Paris after the war was this strange combination of low life and high glamour. And a very interesting time to be dealing with crime. And they're quite hard-hitting, quite unpleasant. Some of the stories. It's definitely not Agatha Christie. It's harsher than that. So that's the next major TV thing. There's a film idea floating around which I may make, and we are completing these Mr. Bean cartoons before the end of this year. And we did a series 8 years ago. I mean, doing a series is a huge project. It takes about 3 years because you've got to make 52 films, 52 11-minute cartoons, and that's a massive wodge of work. And I think these ones are an improvement on the last ones. So I'm hoping that they're going to work. Yeah, unfortunately, being a bit of a perfectionist, I think the glass is normally half empty. All I can see is what's wrong with something. That's usually the problem when I watch films and TV shows that I've done. that I say, oh, if only, no, that line's not funny enough. Why? No, that's all wrong. And although that's good in a way, because in theory it means that you're whittling away at trying to make the glass as full as possible at all times, which means in theory that you do better work. But it's a shame, because I think sometimes I wish that I enjoyed watching what I've done more, because I think by and large it's been okay. I think usually it's worth watching. But as I say, I get my satisfaction from the audience, from other people, and if they like it, then as far as I'm concerned, the job is done. And even if I don't like it, I'll never like it, so there's no point trying to please me. What's sometimes quite good is to leave it a long time before you watch anything. I know with the TV series The Blackadder, which we made a long time ago now, 20 years ago, more, 20 and 25 years ago. And I was on a plane only a few months ago, and they were playing, you know, The Blackadder. You could watch it on the plane. I thought, I'll watch an episode of The Blackadder that I haven't done for 25 years. And I thought, you know what, this is all right. I'm enjoying this, and I couldn't see what was wrong with it. I couldn't, the faults were sort of disguised. Maybe I'd just forgotten the experience of making it. You know, I couldn't remember making the program that I was watching, and I think that's a good thing. So it means you can just sit back and be a normal person watching it and enjoying it. So I can enjoy it now. But as I say, that's leaving it 20 years. So it's a long time to wait before you enjoy what you've done. Well, excluding anything to do with my private family or domestic life, I think the most important thing that happened to me in my professional life was to meet my friend, the screenwriter Richard Curtis, when I went to Oxford University in 1975. And in December 1975, there was a meeting called in the university newspaper for anyone who wanted to be involved in a comedy show, a comedy review, to go to somebody's room at 8 o'clock one night. And I turned up, and there were about 9 or 10 of us there, and one of them was Richard, and another one was me, and we met there, and we've been working together on and off ever since. And it's with Richard, you know, we created Mr. Bean together, and we created the initial version of The Blackadder together. We didn't do Johnny English together, actually. The Johnny English things have been done with other people, but in terms of live work, theatre work, TV work, really, you know, Richard's been the absolute, you know, linchpin of my professional life, and I couldn't be more grateful for what he's done, and couldn't be more grateful for the luck of meeting him. And I think that's one of the odd things about getting older. You suddenly realize how lucky you've been. I think when you have success when you're young, you think, yeah, well, I'm great. So, you know, no wonder I'm having the success. You have a fantastic self-belief, and you think it's all down to you, which it is to a large extent, but by no means in total. Whereas I think when you get older, you sort of think, God, if that hadn't happened, if I hadn't had that meeting, if I hadn't thought to pursue that. I mean, obviously you have driven yourself a lot, so I think one is bound to deserve most of the credit for what you've done, but luck plays a big part. And that's probably the luckiest thing that happened to me, was meeting Richard. The French comedian who's not particularly well known these days, called Jacques Tati, who made some very, very funny films in the 1940s and 1950s and 60s. He was a big hero, particularly in terms of visual comedy. And all those silent comedy experts like Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton and Harold Lloyd and Stan Laurel of Laurel and Hardy, all those sort of guys I admired hugely. But Jacques Tati was the big inspiration in terms of making me think that visual comedy in particular was going to be something I'd like to pursue and like to get good at. It was just, yeah, when I first saw a film of his, it was a real eye-opener. I have been to Russia. I came to Russia in 1991, which was quite an interesting time to go. We were making a commercial, in fact, for Barclaycard, a credit card, and We filmed in Red Square in Moscow, and then we filmed at a dasher out on the coast. I remember two things about it. I remember it was very cold, and I remember being fantastically impressed with the skill of the driving in snow. I was in this massive ZIL limousine, which was a sort of big car of choice in the early 90s in Russia, being driven out to this dasher at a phenomenal speed by this brilliant driver. And as you may know, cars and motor racing are a big interest of mine. And the way he drove this huge car at such speeds on such a, with absolutely no grip between the car and the road, it was very, very impressive. I remember enjoying that. And then the second time I went, the second time I went to Russia was for the premiere of Johnny English Reborn in 2011, 2012. And it must have been 2011. And I remember, yes, actually it was, I remember seeing a lot more of Moscow. I mean, I haven't really been outside Moscow, I'm afraid. But we did a couple of very interesting TV shows, some very funny guys, funny satirical comedy writers and performers. And I appeared on a show of theirs. It's always very, very difficult appearing on a show when you don't speak the language of anyone else on it. But we managed to work something out, and it was interesting to be part of a quite liberal-minded satirical comedy show, and finding that those things do actually exist in Russia and that they're very good. And the traffic, that was the other thing that I remember about Moscow. Huge amount of traffic, very, very difficult getting about. Yeah, they're my abiding memories of it. And very nice people, actually. The people were great, very, very warm and welcoming.